Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM LP 103.3 in Asheville, this is The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian radio show broadcasting out of occupied Salagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world. This week on The Final Straw, we have 3 segments, tidbits in length, but whopping in importance. First up, you'll hear Zachariah Jazz, who distributes alcohol jet heaters with ABQHeateRBloc in so-called Albuquerque, New Mexico, to talk about their efforts to help keep folks living on the streets safer from the elements through mutual aid. Then Tom of Chicago Heater Bloc talks about the construction of these devices. After that, you'll hear Josh from Certain Days Freedom for Political Prisoners Calendar Collective talk about this year's edition and briefly update listeners on the situations of anarchist political prisoners Oso Blanco and Eric King, who Josh works with as well as does support for. Did I say 3? I meant 4 segments. Finally, you'll hear words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain. Make sure to check out the show notes for links pertinent to each of these segments, and keep an eye out on our social media for the November edition of Bad News, a monthly English language compilation podcast from the International A-Radio Network, of which we're a participant. Next week, we'll be sharing a recent conversation with antifascist researcher and activist Matthew Lyons, author of the 2015 PM Press and Kersplebedeb book Insurgent Supremacists, and contributor to the Three-Way Fight blog, to speak about Christian nationalist tendencies and their relationship to distinctly racist elements of the far right in the so-called USA, approaches to understanding Christian patriarchy as regards axes of gender, sexuality, abortion, and bodily autonomy, as well as a call for antifascists to more actively oppose these tendencies. More of Matthew's thoughts on this at the blog matthewnlyons.net.
I'm Zachariah Jazz. I use he, him, they, them pronouns. I am located here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, down in the Southwest. I'm affiliated with ABQHeaterBloc as sort of one of their main distributors. I am founder of my own mutual aid project called Hope for the Hood. I'm the host of my own YouTube channel called It's Controversial with Zachariah Jazz, and that's pretty much it.
What kind of content do you cover on the YouTube channel?
I cover a lot of social issues, social justice movements, specifically more the ones down here. I cover a lot of racist topics, a lot of my work that I've done with my friends who live on the streets, my Hope for the Hood project, and pretty much stuff like that. And
is like Hope for the Hood like just a neighborhood-based mutual aid project? Is that how it would be described, or how would you describe it?
Yeah. That's the best way to describe it. I started it to sort of try to get more resources for my friends who live on the streets, right? Like hoodies or hand warmers, or just any basic things, harm reduction, like, safe, clean needles for them to use, safe pipes, anything like that. Condoms, anything that they need, female products, just any of that stuff. I'm trying to emulate a lot of the other local organizations who didn't have the capacity to sort of reach out to other parts of the city. So just trying to do it here for my little corner of the city. So just kind of like filling in the gaps in the net, I guess. Yeah, pretty much. You could say that.
Cool. Well, what sort of work does Albuquerque Heater Bloc do, and can you talk about, I guess, within the context of that, what houselessness in Albuquerque is like more broadly?
Absolutely. Well, ABQHeaterBloc, it started after we saw what everybody was doing out in like Portland and Philadelphia and stuff like that. And I was working at the Speedway, and I came to them, and a friend of mine told me a story of being out in, like, I guess a field, and it was freezing, and he looked around and he said that, I don't see a way out of this. I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. And I was like, it hit me. I was like, damn, there's a need. That's reality. That's reality. That's what it is for him and many others. So I came back to my friends who make the heaters, and I told them, I was like, there's a need out there, we got to do something about it. And it just so happened that we were able to find Portland Heater Bloc out there in Philly. So they sent us a PDF file of how to build them. So then we started gaining donations, and we started a money pool of our own, just putting in our own money at first to get the supplies needed, and started getting in donations from other local orgs and just random people, who believed in it, who saw it as a good thing. So they started putting the heaters together, and they just started handing them out to me. I started with 4, passed them out, and that was probably the most rewarding part. Was the first time I gave somebody one, and they looked at me and they said, well, how much, man? I said, what do you mean? He was like, what do you want for it? I'm like, nothing, man. It's free. And they're like, wow, really? I'm like, yeah, man, here, take it. It comes with instruction manuals. They come in English and Spanish, and yeah, that's pretty much how it started. And they couldn't believe it because they're so used to being homeless, and on the streets. I guess not only here but anywhere in general, you're used to having to always pay for something, no matter it's a cigarette, it's a lighter, or it's something that you need as a necessity, whatever the case may be, you have to pay for it in some way or another. So the relief of having, for once in their life, not to have to pay for something in any way was rewarding for me in general. Mm-hmm. And every time I encountered somebody, that's how it was, and that's still how it is today. This is the second winter that we're going to be able to do this, and it's still, new people I give a heater to, and it's the same reaction. Man, being homeless out here is getting worse. It's getting harder because everywhere people get comfortable at, they're constantly getting swept everywhere, and they can't sit outside the gas station because for obvious reasons, right? Mm-hmm. And they can't be in the communities or in the neighborhoods because the people in the neighborhood are assholes, and they're just going to tell them to kick them out anyway, force them out, or call the police, whatever. So they have to hide. They have to hide away. It's out of sight, out of mind, and it's constantly like that. But then they do that, and they might be arrested for trespassing wherever they may be. So it's like nobody's going to be happy or satisfied until all these people are arrested, in jail permanently. That's the language that they use would allow me to assume that they just want to lock people up forever, and obviously we can't do that. So the other solution is housing, and that's just not even available. We have a gateway center here, well, it's called the Gateway Center, that has so many restrictions and rules and regulations, and to even be able to get in, you have to be clean for like 3 weeks, and people don't have the resources on the street to be able to get clean, or have the luxury of having a safe place to even get clean, to be able to gain access to the potential housing that the city is attempting to offer. So it's hard for them to navigate, and it's difficult. So, and half the people, they don't have IDs, identification, they don't have birth certificates, social security cards, or anything like that. And there's ways to even be able to get that. We'll be able to get their IDs without having, birth certificate, all that stuff, or even a address. But that's still hard for people to do, because a lot of them, they don't have phones to be able to do certain interviews to get, because healthcare for the homeless out here, they'll give ID vouchers. If you're getting Medicaid through the state, you can use your Medicaid card as proof of ID to be able to get an ID, but they can't even do that because they don't have the resources to be able to fill out an application or even a phone to take the interview. So it's really hard for people to navigate this system that is constantly working against them.
Mm-hmm. That echoes what I hear about here in Asheville, and what I've experienced on the West Coast when I lived out there too, as far as resources available or lack thereof. Does Albuquerque as a city sort of present as like I imagine as kind of a liberal city, present itself as like, look, we have these available resources. It's not up to us to force people to take advantage of these resources, but still not have the very like entry level things that would, like you said with the Gateway Center, if there's like limitations to people being able to get in to be able to take advantage of the resources that are there, does the city just sort of say publicly that like, well, we have the resources available and just cut off the conversation at that point? Or yeah, so listeners to this episode are going to hear our chat with someone behind the Heater Bloc project in Chicago, where obviously like winter storms amplified by lake effect frequently bring temperatures below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. But many listeners may be surprised to hear of a need like this in Albuquerque. You know, you may think of like, well, it's in the Southwest, so it's therefore going to be like warm year round. But can you talk a little bit about like local climate and temperature ranges for folks throughout the year there?
Absolutely. Our weather is kind of all over the place because we are in a desert, but at the same time we are at the very end of the Rocky Mountain range. We are in the Sandia Mountains, and that's just right at the bottom of the Rocky Mountains. And we do have a river here. I mean, it's almost drying up because climate change and all that other things. But yeah, no, it gets extremely cold here during the winter, and the past, I'd say 4 or 5 winters, we've had week-long blizzards and snowstorms where you get snow coming all the way up to your knees. Like it can be that bad, and so it gets extremely cold here. It's reached at easily like the low 20s, probably even lower than that. I don't always check, but it gets extremely cold here, and cold enough for even like the little bit of water from the sprinklers or something, for that to freeze. So it gets extremely cold here, and you'd be surprised how chilling this desert can get. So these heaters have been very, very helpful for people. Yeah, because it definitely doesn't stay too hot year round. If that was the case, maybe we need to find a way to have makeshift some air conditioners for people to take around with them.
Mm-hmm. Like you were saying, like when you started out, you started with 4 heaters that you were distributing. If you had your druthers and just had like a constant supply, about how many do you think you'd be able to distribute? And just out of curiosity, like, do you think there's such a thing as like a saturation level with heater distro, like a point where you would get enough of them handed out that people just wouldn't have needs for them? Or do they get destroyed during the sweeps or broken or stolen?
Well, yeah, that's probably the number one problem, I guess, is that they do get broken a lot. The jars break, the flower pots break, the cages get smashed, and because they're honestly, they take a lot of space.
Mm-hmm.
So people who they have to carry a whole bunch of stuff already as it is, having to carry something else is cumbersome,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be inconvenient. But people who will prioritize that, they will carry them around, or they'll even stash them somewhere where they know they can come back and get them and it'll still be there. But I'd say from February to the end of winter, we handed out 10 dozen heaters total.
Wow.
And this winter, we've already started with 10 dozen. We've already passed out 10 dozen, and we're reaching the end of our supplies because we haven't been able to bring in any more donations so far. But I think with all that being said, and the reality of how fragile the heaters can be, I don't think there will ever come a point where we can stop, where there won't be a need to pass them out anymore, because they do get broken in sweeps. They do get broken just from moving or even just being there, being clumsy or something. They do get broken. But I mean, if people were able to hold on to them, or even just some of the components, it would make it a whole lot easier for us to be able to get supplies or even save, Yeah, pretty much. If people were to hold on to them, it would be a whole lot easier. But that's just not something that's within possibility. It's just too difficult out there.
Yeah, yeah. And at least the like the ingredients that put these together, like while at a bulk of making 10 dozen, that's, you know, it sounds like a lot of money, but if each individual one is not that expensive, then at least replacing them, and especially if folks are getting together collaboratively to make those replacements and distribute them, then that, you know, that takes a lot of the weight off of it. So yeah, we started talking about this because y'all are doing that fundraiser, and I was hoping to hear your experiences with this sort of work, especially as the temperatures start dropping, but B, to help you sort of like amplify the fundraiser. Can you talk about like what kind of goals you have for the fundraiser and what amounts of material, or like how many you think that initial fundraising goal would make? Or is it just kind of raise what you can and do what you can with it?
Yeah, raise what we can and do what we can with it. Because I'm not the ABQ Heater Bloc, you know, handle or anything. I just work as the distributor. They haven't set an actual cap for donation amounts, I guess. Yeah, just get what we can, work with it. Because if you break them down, you know, they come down to $11 a heater. I mean, in all, it's not very expensive. It's pretty inexpensive, right? So that's how we were able to make so many and push out so many, even just last year or last winter alone, in such a short amount of time, and how we were able to put out the same amount in just as short of amount of time this year or this winter so far.
How can people? I mean, I'm going to put it in the show notes also, and link to your social media presence and YouTube channel, and also the ABQ Heater Bloc. But do you happen to have offhand the information about where listeners can donate in case they're just listening to this?
Yeah. So you can donate to ABQ Heater Bloc's Venmo. That's at ABQ Heater Bloc.
Where can people go to learn more about these projects and find your YouTube channel also? And if they're in the area, are you looking for folks to get involved in either of those projects, either in the neighborhood mutual aid project or in the Heater Bloc?
Oh, absolutely. So you can find ABQ Heater Bloc on Twitter at ABQ Heater Bloc. You can find them on Instagram at ABQ Heater Bloc. You can find my YouTube channel on It's Controversial with Zachariah Jazz. I'm also on Facebook. It's Controversial with Zachariah Jazz. That's also where you can find my mutual aid project, Hope for the Hood. And anybody in the area who's listening, yeah, we could definitely use more people that want to get involved, more feet on the streets, you know, equals more heaters we're able to get out to people. We put together build parties when we do have the funds to be able to hold them. That's how we're able to just make 10 dozen heaters this winter so far, so in such a short amount of time. Yeah, we have build parties, and yeah, just that's pretty much it. And I could always use help personally with my Hope for the Hood project out here, because it is just me in that project, and you know, I'm not very good with the social media, you know, outreach, all that stuff, you know, but getting donations so far has been a mountain to climb as it is. I would think I've gotten like one $15 donation so far, you know, so it's been kind of rocky, but still, even then, I do what I can on my own, with my own funds. Just even then, just if I'm not able to provide the things that I want to, just a cigarette here and there, or $1 here and there, or give them a free drink at the gas station or something here and there. It means everything to them. So, but any help, you know, anybody in the area wants to provide is more than welcome.
Well, thanks a lot again for the short notice, being willing to chat with me and share this information with the audience, and good luck.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate you having me. I couldn't be more grateful.
This is the Final Straw Radio, and you just heard our chat with Zachariah Jazz about alcohol heater distribution and houselessness in and around so-called Albuquerque, New Mexico. And now we continue on that theme. Just a note worth sharing, in the show notes we have links to some various mutual aid projects that could probably use some support during this time of year, especially as folks are preparing for the colder weather. The Final Straw is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, and here's a jingle from another member of CZN.
I'm going to make those pompous academics regret kicking out such a genius. Deciding to build my lab and do my research.
The Time Talks Podcast.
Have you ever stared at a 500-page book and wish you could just talk to the author about their ideas instead? If so, the Time Talks podcast, part of the Channel Zero Network, is for you, where we discuss history, politics, music, and art with an anti-authoritarian and anarchist perspective.
The Time Talks podcast.
What's this light? I feel different.
The Time Talks podcast.
I'm Tom. He, him is fine. And I'm from Chicago. And I live on the northwest side, sort of.
So I was excited to ask you about this project that you've been embarking on, which is the construction of small, portable, and inexpensive heaters. I wonder if you could talk a bit about them, like what they're made of and what inspired you to get involved in creating these.
Yeah, so I just saw it on an Instagram post that someone had shared to their story. And it was actually, like, the headline just said, anarchists are building these heaters for homeless people. And I was like, okay. I can do that. That sounds cool. Thankfully, there was someone had linked it. I don't think the poster had it yet, but someone linked, I believe it was Heater Bloc NYC, who has a link in their bio to a Google Drive document that outlines everything about them. So they're just little heaters that run on alcohol, and there's a ton of info in this Google Drive that you can find pretty easily. And the good thing about alcohol is there's no dangerous fumes. So in that sense, they're very good for tents. It's a jar with a little copper coil coming out of it. And then that is surrounded by a wire fencing mesh kind of thing to hold up a ceramic pot, which will get very hot and radiate heat. And then all of that is just on a plate. So they're pretty safe if you turn them sideways. So if they fall over or something, they go out. Just because the way it works is the copper heats up, and then I don't know if atomizes is the right word, but it makes the liquid alcohol into a gas, and then that comes out a little hole in the bottom of the copper coil, which lights and then kind of continues the whole process itself. So that's how you light them. You just it can take a while, but you just hold a lighter to the copper until it starts vaporizing and comes out the hole, and then it'll continue that process.
Cool. So it's got that little clay pot on the top of it that heats up and radiates. Is that is there much of a I know there's it sounds like a small open flame that's involved in this that I imagine is somewhat protected by that flower pot or whatever, but is there much chance of burning or setting fire to a tent or something like that with that?
I think the worst thing that could happen would be burning yourself on the pot, or melting part of a plastic tent or a blanket or something. The pot does get very hot. I don't think it would I think if it tipped over, the flame would go out, and I don't think the pot would be so hot as to ignite a flame. But it would certainly burn you or probably melt something. So you do have to be kind of careful. And that's part of the plan. Is on the plate there's you just kind of make a weird sun shape with caulk, just to keep everything from sliding around too much. So there, in that sense, I've thought about ways to hold it down on the bottom, but you want to be able to lift the pot from the metal part, because that doesn't get too hot, but the pot is very hot. So if you have to refill it or something, or put it out, you'd want to take that off, and then you could grab the jar.
Does it take experience or any special tools to work on the copper? Did you have any experience before?
Particularly, I have some experience in metalworking, but it can be difficult for sure to bend the copper around. You have to have some leverage to it, and it's much easier if you have some tools and a vise. But I didn't have super easy access to that kind of stuff the first time I made them, and I was able to make 12 or so. I've been trying to make some fixtures and stuff to make it a little easier, and the copper is kind of tricky. I actually saw you can, if you just Google alcohol jet burner, you can find them, and they have it's kind of interesting, they have a different twist in the copper tubing, which in theory, you could use a little bit less material and then, therefore get more out of whatever you buy from the store. But I made one like that and it wasn't really working. So, but they are, like, copper's not that hard to bend, but it's not like super easy either. So like I've kind of had help with some pliers to kind of really twist it around and get it tighter around whatever you're using to bend it around. It's supposed to be about an inch. So if you find something that's an inch in diameter, you can use that. And you have to be careful not to kink it. There is part of the directions is filling the copper with salt and tipping off the ends, because that will keep it from kinking.
Like a pixie stick. But copper.
Really.
And less tasty.
Pixies.
Yeah. So overall, like, could you give a guesstimate of, like, if someone gets this method of making it down pretty well, what they would cost on, like, what it would cost to create one of these devices?
That is on the Google Doc. I think it's about $7, but that can vary. Certainly, inflation will affect that, and just your local prices. And then if you're able to buy in bulk too, if you are making a lot, I was looking at the bigger roll of the metal mesh, and I think it was like $87 or something, which is kind of steep, but like obviously you would get a lot out of that, and that is like the most effective way to get the most out of your money there. So it just kind of depends what you're able to put into it, but I think 7 was the rounded answer there.
And it's just like rubbing alcohol, or what kind of alcohol would you have to put in it?
Yeah, isopropyl alcohol is the you can get like 70%, 80%. And I guess I'm not 100%. It seems kind of weird, but I guess the rest of the 10% or 30 or whatever is just like water. So if you keep refilling that, there will be like a little bit of water that like doesn't burn, and you'll have to empty that out of the jar. But you can even use like hand sanitizer. I think like the lower grade there is, or if there's some type of scent in it or something, it'll cause more soot. Because they get a little bit sooty. You should like wipe them down after they cool off. And then you can use denatured alcohol, which burns very hot. So that you can like cook over them too. It'd probably be better with denatured alcohol, but those flames can get a little crazy. I think if you're going to use that, you can drill a smaller hole in the copper, and it works a little better that way. But you probably won't know if you're going to use that. That's a little harder. Not hard, but I think it's more expensive and like a little more specialty than some type of rubbing alcohol.
Or I guess you could probably just have a couple different coils that you would use for different purposes potentially. Yeah, it's like way cheaper than a camping stove.
Yeah, that's true. I do. Yeah, I have a little backpacking like aluminum stove that runs on denatured alcohol. That is pretty cool. So I can attest to that being it does burn very hot. It's weird too. It's a totally like clear flame in the daylight. It's kind of freaky because you don't even know it's burning.
Like, do you have a sense of how long, say like denatured alcohol, or just say like rubbing alcohol in there how many hours of burning you could get off something like that?
So this doc is very thorough. Like all this stuff is in here. I can't say I've read every word of it or anything, but there is a lot of information here. And I think they tell you to use 8-ounce jars in this. And I think most of the other heater blocks that I just follow on Instagram, and I started the Chicago one. It's just like Heater Bloc Chicago, Heater Bloc Dallas, Heater Bloc NYC, Philly, stuff like that. I think most people have started making them with the 16-ounce jars. And I think it says on here that like a 8-ounce one can burn from like 6 to 8 hours or something in that ballpark. Or it might have even been a little less. I want to say it was like, seemed like it wouldn't necessarily be a full night. So like maybe it would be better to use a bigger one. But that's the bigger jars are just as easy, if not easier to find, I think. So I think it's around 7 or 8 hours.
Are there any lessons that you've specifically learned while doing this? I think you said at one point that you had made your own tools that were kind of specialized for the curving of the copper. Is that right?
A little bit, yeah. I think that one needs a little work, but it's just like a dowel, like a couple of them screwed close together so that you can get some like leverage on it, and you have the right size piece right there. I made a little thing for the lids of the jars to like put something in and put something on top of it, and then the holes are set up so you know right where to drill it. And I haven't gotten around to it, but I do plan on posting pictures to the Instagram account if anyone wants to see what I'm talking about, or copy or whatever. And I did the first ones I made, I stuck through the jar lids a little too far, and then I was using the wider and shorter 8-ounce jars, and I had them like full of the alcohol, and I think if the copper sticks down too far, it starts sucking out like liquid a little bit. I think it kind of creates a vacuum there, and the first time I lit it, I was like, oh, cool, it's working. And then all of a sudden, like the whole top of the jar was on fire.
Oh, God.
And I had done it like inside. I was like, oh, no. And, like kind of took it outside and was talking to my roommates and was like, yeah, I mean, it says tent safe, but this isn't looking so great. But then once it burned off a little bit, it was much more reasonable, what I expected. So I kind of learned that you don't want to stick those in too far. Although with the taller jars, bigger jars, it's less of an issue because you don't have to fill it quite as full. Not that you have to, but again, with an 8-ounce jar, it probably would only burn for like, 4 or 5 hours or something, especially if it's not all the way full because you put the copper in too far. So you have to be a little careful with that.
It's okay if you don't have an answer to this because I just kind of thought of it, but I'd been listening to a recent episode of Live Like the World is Dying, which is a podcast that Strangers in the Tangled Wilderness does. It's a project that Margaret Killjoy is involved with, and she was talking at one point about candle heaters that people were promoting, which was some idea of like basically making like a sort of lid with a pot over a candle, and the idea that the candle heat would then be radiated more equally once it hits that clay surface. It would just kind of like somehow, instead of just going mostly up, it would radiate out to the sides more. And she was talking about how it was definitely not safe for tents, and also the idea that it was amplifying somehow heat didn't make sense with thermodynamics. But have you heard about those sort of devices or people talking about those?
No, I did. That's interesting. It does seem like there's just not enough fuel there to like really heat it enough. Just in like off the top of my head, it seems a little strange. But I do think like you heat up a pot, it will radiate heat in the same way that these do. So maybe.
Let's see. I know that you were able at some point, you were saying, to construct like a few of them at a time, and you've been talking about like getting better like bulk supplies of the ingredients for them. Have you had much luck with distributing them, or do you have any notes for folks who maybe don't live in a city that has an Instagram page that says, that's called like Heater Bloc? Or if someone's living in a place that gets cold in the winter, they maybe have the resources and the time to devote to something like this, and maybe them and a couple friends can make these. Do you have any suggestions on how to get them into people's hands?
I've only given them out to a couple encampments, so I would say that's something I struggle with. I'm just not a very outgoing person, but everyone has been very receptive of them if you just come up and give them to them and explain it and try. I would say I actually just got a nice like torch because I saw one of the Instagrams, they had it, and there's like lighting them much faster, and I had some issues with that, just trying to show them how it worked and not being able to get it lit because it was like cold outside and windy, and then one of them took it in their tent and it was like, oh yeah, this is cool. But like, if I had that torch, that would be like, there you go. You see what to do. You can do it with a lighter. It just takes a little longer. But yeah, as far as the bulk stuff goes too, you can get a lot of this, like the copper tubing is common in like refrigerator type stuff. So like they're actually almost out the first time I got it, but like, so you might have to go to a couple stores or something, but they had like a 10-foot coil, which is not too expensive. I think it might have only been like $10 or something. And then I found it like a deal online for like 25 feet or something that was a little better. So like if you can do bulk, you know, you can save money, but they're still not too expensive. You know, if you just have to buy it like enough to make a handful or something. The plates too, I haven't quite tested them yet, but I just got some super cheap like aluminum ones that are like they're a little bit flimsy, but they're not like the foil ones, you know. So I was thinking they didn't seem quite as good as I thought they'd be. I was thinking I might like throw some caulk in one and smush two of them together and see if that comes out better, because the plates can be expensive. If you find them like at a thrift store or something, that's cool. But if you buy like new plates, you know, they're nothing fancy or anything, but they still can be kind of pricey.
You mentioned a few resources like that Google Doc, and that there are Instagram pages for groups in different parts of the so-called U.S. that are making and distributing and teaching about these. Are there any other resources that people might find useful if they're going to be doing this, or do you want to re-shout out any of those projects in Philly or elsewhere?
I do. I heard Philly and I think Spokane on a podcast. It doesn't look like Spokane has a Instagram. And then, of course, I mentioned Heater Bloc NYC. They're the ones that I got the doc from. And it's also in the Heater Bloc Chicago bio now as well. And they're also, I don't exactly know what to call them, you know, but I guess you just call them like an alcohol stove or burner or something, but alcohol jet burner. I saw that somewhere. And like I mentioned, you can buy them online. And if you look that up, there's quite a few like videos on how to make them as well. You know, it's very possible that would be, there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of info in the doc too about like fuels and stuff like that, which can be helpful, but I'm sure these videos run through the whole process pretty quickly. It might be easier for people to learn from.
Well, thanks a lot for taking the time to have this conversation. I appreciate it, and thanks for doing that work. It's really awesome. This is the Final Straw Radio, and you just heard Tom from Chicago Heater Bloc on constructing inexpensive alcohol heaters for houseless folks as temperatures drop. So I'm joined by Josh Davidson of the Certain Days Calendar Project to speak about this year's installment. Thank you so much for coming back, Josh.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Would you mind telling listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm an abolitionist involved in the Certain Days Freedom for Political Prisoners Calendar Collective. I've been doing that for a number of years now. I'm also a member of the Children's Art Project, CAP, with political prisoner Oso Blanco. And I'm currently writing a book with political prisoner and anarchist Eric King, where we interview current and former political prisoners about their lives inside. And in addition to that, I work at the Zen Education Project, where we provide radical people's history to teachers and people around the world.
That's awesome. Thank you so much again for joining us. In case any listeners don't know about Oso Blanco or about Eric, would you mind giving a little rundown of their cases?
Yeah, absolutely. Oso Blanco is an indigenous political prisoner. He's been in prison since the late 90s. And he was basically is imprisoned for a number of expropriations of bank robberies that he did, where he sent all the money to the Zapatistas in the Chiapas area of Mexico. And he's still in prison today in some of the harshest federal prisons in the country. And he wanted to come up with the idea of using indigenous artwork from people in prison to support the Zapatistas. So what we did was create greeting cards and shirts with this artwork, and all the money raised goes to children and people with the Zapatistas.
Cool. And Oso Blanco is Cherokee, right?
Yes, true. And Eric King is an anarchist and anti-fascist political prisoner who's going on 10 years in prison now. He's expected to be released in a little over a year, and he was in prison for a politically motivated act of property destruction following the police murder of Michael Brown in 2014. And that's about it.
So for listeners who don't know the project, could you describe certain days? And this is, I guess, the 22nd year of its publication. Is that right?
Yeah, the 2023 calendar will be our 22nd calendar. So it's been around since just after the turn of the century, and it's a joint fundraising and educational project between outside organizers around the country and in Canada, and political prisoners held within the U.S. It originally started with former Black Panthers Herman Bell and Robert Seth Hayes, and white anti-imperialist political prisoner David Gilbert. This is the first year where we can actually say that all of our founding members are no longer in prison. Herman and Seth were released a few years ago, and David was released last year. So our only current inside member is Zanochly, who's a Chicano political prisoner imprisoned in Texas. But every year we create this beautiful calendar, which has 12 pieces of art and 12 essays and tons of other radical things, including radical dates throughout each month. And we promote and sell these calendars to raise money for those locked inside.
It's really a pity that this is an audio-only format for sharing this, because it's such a beautiful calendar. And I know that y'all have been going through the archives and pulling old editions and selling those off at a discounted rate, right?
Yeah, you can get those. You can follow us on social media and find those, or email us. It's really great to kind of see the progression of the calendar over the last 20-some years, but also just the beautiful artwork and things like that. Some people have shared pictures where they just cover their walls with the artwork from all the years, and it's really beautiful and breathtaking.
Yeah, I've used it as present packaging before wrapping paper.
Nice.
It's really startling how beautiful some of the imagery is. And that way you're kind of giving someone just like a little taste of some of the dates too, maybe like seeing it around their birthday or something like that. But
yeah, for sure.
So you mentioned that the remaining collective member that's still behind bars is Zanochly. I mentioned in the announcements for last week's show that there's going to be a rally coming up in Austin at the University of Texas to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the political assassination, or the death by incarceration of Ricardo Flores Magón, that Central Texas Anarchist Black Cross is helping to coordinate with Zanochly's defense committee, and that they're also using that as an opportunity to have a vigil for Zanochly and call for his release.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like an amazing event down there, and Zanochly's been deeply involved in that for a number of years.
And you've got folks who are on the outside, like we've had you and Daniel and Sarah in the past speaking. So it's still, y'all still have like the cross-border collaboration in the outside portions of the collective?
Yeah, we do, and it's kind of expanded in the last year or so. We've added a few new members that are helping out. One in Canada and a few in the U.S., and that's been really helpful to kind of get that new, breath of fresh air into the collective and new ideas and things like that. Hopefully, that comes across in the new calendar.
What projects are benefiting from the sale of the calendars this year?
So money raised during the sale of the 2022 calendars is being used or is going to the group Release Aging People in Prison, RAP, based out of New York, that helps get aging people and others out of prison in the state of New York, and is really kind of a really progressive and amazing group. We also supplied some funds to the Mutulu Shakur legal support team. As most people know, Mutulu Shakur is battling late-stage cancer and is not expected to live for many more months, but the federal government still refuses to release him. We also provided funding to the Sundiata Acoli Release Fund. Sundiata was finally released after 50 years in prison, and I believe he is living with family and getting along well so far. Yeah, and we also provided funding to the Palestinian Youth Movement, the Puget Sound Prisoner Support Coalition to Decarcerate Illinois, and several other organizations, which every year we provide funding to different groups in need and that are on the front lines of this battle.
Besides the projects that you all are helping to support through the sale, I know various groups are able to buy bulk copies and benefit their own initiatives by selling copies at cover price, right?
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. It's a really great additional thing that we do. The calendars retail for $15 each, but if your group or organization wants to buy them and raise awareness and funds on your behalf, you can buy 10 or more for $10 each, and then save that $5 for your own projects to raise funds for your own efforts.
Can you talk about the work to get copies of the calendar through prison bars?
Yeah, sure. That's something, unfortunately, that has gotten more difficult as the years progress. We send calendars inside to thousands of people every year. We also sponsor copies. So if you want to send a copy into someone inside, you can go to our website, certaindays.org, and sponsor a copy for $8 a copy to someone inside. But both federally and in several states, it has become much more difficult to get calendars into prisoners. The reasons vary. Sometimes it's because it's a calendar and they're not allowed to have calendars for some reason. Sometimes it's because of the writing or the art, although we always do keep that in mind and try to have as radical and amazing art as possible, but knowing that it's something that we will be trying to get inside of prisons. Sometimes it's we've print off PDFs of just the artwork and the essays and not send the calendar dates, and somehow that makes it in. But it is an ongoing struggle to be able to get this calendar and books and just things in general to people locked up.
So if folks are thinking about getting copies or sponsoring editions to go behind bars, where can they order some?
Sure. Yeah, there's plenty of places. Best place to go is certaindays.org. And from there, you can, we have a page where you can find all the local bookstores. It's great to support your local bookstores. So if you have one near you that sells the calendar, that's the place to go. If not, beg and annoy your local bookstore to start carrying the calendar. You can also go to burningbooks.com, and they have amazing radical books that you can get along with the calendar. Also AK Press, Left Wing Books, a few other places like that.
And I guess Left Wing Books is especially good if you're north of the border in so-called Canada, right?
Correct. Yep.
Well, cool. Is there anything that I didn't ask about that you wanted to talk about?
There's plenty to talk about, but I'll just, if you don't mind, I'd like to just shout out some of the amazing contributors from the 2023 calendar.
Yeah,
we had
please.
some really great people this year. Collective member David Gilbert wrote a beautiful and moving piece about his partner, Kathy Boudin, who died in May. Ed Mead of the George Jackson Brigade wrote a really beautiful piece about Bo Brown, GJB member who died also this year. There's a beautiful piece by Noel Hanrahan about Mumia. There's a great piece by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz and also by Cindy Milstein. And then there's some just really beautiful art this year as well. So I hope people pick up a copy and check it out.
That's awesome. And you can see examples of some of that at certaindays.org.
And on all of our social media. If you don't follow us, be sure to follow us there, and we'll let you know the best way to get the calendar and all the new places it's available.
Do you have any updates on the situation where Eric King is at? And like, people may recall that you and I spoke some months back, about Eric's situation and his, how despite winning a federal lawsuit or, despite like successfully challenging charges of assault on an officer against a bad lieutenant, if you will, in the Bureau of Prisons, like he's been getting diesel therapy around a bit. But can you talk about like where he's at right now and what his mail status is and any other such?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to say that he is getting mail and able to send mail. As you said, prior to his case, he'd been going through hell and shipped around the country. He'd been in solitary confinement for 4 years, at least, go over 4 years, I believe. And this is all for an act of property destruction in which no one was harmed or anything like that. But he did, he was found not guilty in this case of abuse against a guard. And he's a medium level prisoner, meaning he shouldn't be in the strictest of prisons. But after this court victory, he was sent to Florence AdMax, Administrative Maximum. And that is the most supermax prison in the country. It's the harshest, the most secure, the most guarded. And he is there now. He is basically in a cell for 23 hours a day. There's double doored, but he is able to get mail and books. His support team just received a letter from him the other day, and by the time this airs, everything will be up on his website. There's a new poem, a new book list where you can send him books, and a whole bunch of really new stuff from him about being in AdMax and his hopes for when he gets out in about a year. So I highly recommend writing him, checking him out if you haven't already. His website is supportericking.org. And yeah. He's also got some YouTube. He's a great person to write to. He's all over the place. He's got many interests. He's got YouTube playlists of his favorite songs, and yeah, I highly recommend writing to him or to any of the people locked inside today.
Well, cool. Josh, thanks a lot for taking the time to have this conversation. Thanks for all the work that you do.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
That was Josh from Certain Days. If you're in the Asheville area and want to grab one of those calendars for yourself, you can check out the monthly letter writing event on the first Sunday of the month with Blue Ridge ABC, Anarchist Black Cross. Location to be announced at brabc.blackblogs.org or via their social media. Just a note on a thing that Josh had said when he was mentioning that Dr. Mutulu Shakur was still fighting to be released and suffering from bone cancer. Dr. Shakur has been scheduled to be released to the outside. He still has what appears to be a terminal case of bone marrow cancer that he's been suffering with since 2019, but we're very happy to hear that he's going to be coming out. You should be able to still make donations to his support committee, and I'm sure that they could use that money to help cover the cost of medical care and such while he's on the outside via PayPal to the address mutuluShakur@hotmail.com. And you can keep up on updates at mutuluShakur.com. Free them all. And now some words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain.
What you say, what you say, what you say, what? We'll come like a flood.
I write this on Tuesday, November 8th, Election Day in the United States. The vote tallies haven't even started yet. By the time you hear this, we'll all have a pretty good sense as to how it all stacks up. Who controls the House and the Senate, as if that matters. I have frequently said that there's no substantial difference between Democrats and Republicans, that they both make good hostages. But the inverse of that is also true. They make lousy hostage takers, and we are all their hostages. I've watched all the political nerd coverage of the election leading up to today, and one thing is pretty clear. The Republicans are going to make gains somewhere. They'll likely get a slim majority in one of the houses of Congress, and that means they'll neutralize whatever Democrats try to get done and create 2 years of gridlock. Even if they get a sizable majority in one house or both, it makes no difference because Biden will veto anything they attempt to do, and we're back to gridlock. Best case scenario for anything getting done by anybody in D.C. over the next 2 years is if the Democrats, by some major miracle, hold their majorities in both houses. Then they can get only inconsequential shit done because Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin are too beholden to special interests. What this all adds up to is 2 years of lawmakers in D.C. collecting paychecks and getting top-notch health care that you can't afford. And they'll get it for throwing pencils up into the ceiling tiles. This election is something to make everyone miserable, except the folks who have the money and the power. It appears that this midterm has record-breaking turnout, which would indicate that a record-breaking number of Americans are invested in the outcome. I guess we're going to see a record-breaking number of pissed-off voters when it's all said and done. The fact is, elections are in place to give us the illusion of power over the process. Americans proudly cast ballots and sit on the edges of their seats to await the outcome, as if this outcome will somehow be different, more meaningful than the outcomes of the last 8,000 years of hierarchy. It won't. We're trained to focus on how elections provide us the power. Very limited power, really, if you look at it closely. We don't have power over which corporate parties exist to put up candidates. We don't have power over who runs those parties or who sets their agendas. We don't even really have power over which candidates those corporate parties nominate and push out onto the public stage for our votes. So the whole process really is out of our control. We only get to make our preference known at the very end, choosing between two sticks we find reprehensible and holding our noses as we vote for the lesser of the two evils. And even in that, we don't necessarily get what we want. The lesser of two evils seldom wins, you know. So elections are not about democratic governance and peaceful transitions of power. They're about continued governance and the peaceful accumulation of power that two parties trade back and forth. And the more of us who buy in, who are duped into thinking this swindle is legitimate, the less the threat of angry mobs taking up pitchforks and torches to change things rudely and directly. And you know what? Let me be the one to say it. We have to give credit where credit is due. Yeah, the extreme right wing is composed of racists and homophobes, and their vision of the future is a dystopian nightmare I don't want to live in. But they know how to smack cops in the heads with a fire extinguisher. They know how to smash windows and ransack the Capitol. They know how to send Mike Pence running for his miserable, worthless life. Anarchists have hated government for the entire history of government, but we've never gathered in mass, thousands of savage cannibal maniacs chasing the ruling elite from their hallowed halls. The first rebel to drop a in the desk drawer of the President of the Senate wasn't an anarchist, but some QAnon wackadoodle. I say this not to demoralize or discourage anyone, but simply as an observation, sad as it may be. Pro-cop right-wingers have shown themselves, sporadically, to be better at this demand than we are. You can hate me for saying it, but it's true. The good news is, after this record turnout for this election and the inevitable disappointing results, whatever they are, we're going to have millions who are feeling angry and betrayed and unseen. And so we have millions of opportunities to present an alternative to the current system of control. Millions of opportunities to break people free from the cages that hierarchy has built around their minds. We'll have millions of chances to show people what real freedom looks like. So, here's to the next rebel to drop a in the desk drawer of the President of the Senate. The sooner the better, however this election cycle goes. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain from the Super Duper Uber Mega Ultra Hyper Turbo Ulti Maxi Max in Youngstown, Ohio. If you're listening, you are the resistance.
You can still write Sean at his new old new again address at Sean Swain number A243205 OSP Youngstown 878 Coitesville Hubbard Road, Youngstown, Ohio 44505. You can find his past writings, updates on his case, hear his past audio, find out how to get his books, plus ways to contribute to his legal defense fund at SeanSwain.org. This is The Final Straw. This show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw Radio, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned co-op in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a catalog of Firestorm's books and zines, plus a full calendar of events up at their website, firestorm.coop.